Hello, everyone. Welcome to our CAiRE webinar today. We are very honored to have Mr. Antoine Blondeau and Mr. Charles-Edouard Bouée today to have a fireside chat with me about how to become a global AI entrepreneur. So it's global, it's AI, it's becoming an entrepreneur. I know some of you are from business school, others are entrepreneurs, and a lot of you are engineering students. So let's hear from them. The lessons from China, US, and the EU. Let me introduce the panelists first. So we have Mr. Antoine Blondeau, who is a co-founder and managing partner of Alpha Intelligence Capital, a global venture fund of USD 185 million investing in deep AI and machine learning technology-based companies. So they're investors. But Antoine also has lived and worked in Japan, Hong Kong, Germany, US, and France. He was in the senior positions in the technology industry for 25 years, including in Good Technology, Salesforce, Sybase. But more importantly, actually more importantly for us today, is that he was also the CEO and co-founder of several AI companies, including Dejima, it was acquired by Apple and became Apple Siri. He was also co-founder and COO of Zi Corporation with smart text input software, and the co-founder of Sentient Technologies, one of the most advanced AI platform companies in the US. Antoine is an investor personally now, angel investor, VC, board member, advisor in a number of technology companies in the US, Greater China, and Europe. He's an advisor to several companies, and he holds an MBA from the Paris Graduate School of Management and has studied in Japan at the Chuo University. He has authored 6 patents, so we can hear from him what those 6 patents are. And then we also have Mr. Charles-Edouard Bouée. So he also lived in 5 countries. He is also a managing partner of Alpha Intelligence Capital. Now, from 2013 to 2019, he was in a different industry. He was the global CEO of Roland Berger, the only leading global consulting firm of European origin. And then he led the transformation to a record year in the firm's history of over 50 years. Now, during his tenure as a consultant in the industry, Charles-Edouard became a seasoned expert in large-scale strategy and reorganization projects, as well as performance improvement. He specializes in disruptive innovation, hence the link to AI, new technologies, and digital transformation, and has since developed a particular expertise in AI. Charles-Edouard has lived, as I said, he lived also in 5 countries. So let me see, France, UK, US, Germany, and China. And I should mention that he's one of the very few people who holds a Chinese green card. And he today operates out of China, Shanghai, Hong Kong, with strong ties to Paris, his hometown. He's Harvard Business School alumni from the class of '95. He's on the advisory board of the China-Europe International Business School, involved in the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on AI. He has authored a number of groundbreaking books on modern management and China in both English and French, and they have been translated into various languages, including Chinese and Japanese. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'm your host today. I'm Professor Pascale Fung, the director of CAiRE, Center for AI Research at UST. I guess my particular role today as a host is that based on my own experience, I've also lived in 5 countries, China, Hong Kong, Japan, the US, and France, and then started a co-founder with my students, various companies in the US, in Hong Kong, and China as well. So, so let's start our webinar. Let's welcome the panelists. So perhaps the first, after the introduction, the first question, I will ask each of the panelists some questions, and then feel free to interject or comment. I would like to ask the audience to hold your questions until the Q&A session, but you can start by posting your question in the chat and in the QA, and then we will answer the questions. The panelists will answer the questions after our fireside chat. So let's start. Antoine. So Mr. Blondeau, Antoine, if I can call you. So you have been you were a very successful entrepreneur in AI. So can you tell us, the audience, when did you first encounter AI? You didn't start as an AI engineer, did you? How did you first get involved in the AI entrepreneurship? And how is your experience as an entrepreneur in AI, specifically compared to other industry? You started quite a few years ago before AI became really hot. So how did you get involved in that?
Yeah, thank you, Pascale. And it's great to be here today. Always a pleasure to be with you and everybody at HKUST and everybody at within the network of HKUST. So thank you again. So my involvement with AI starts from childhood, as many of us, I guess. When I was born into an era where science fiction was starting to make a dent in entertainment. So I remember, watching 2001: The Space Odyssey, and then Westworld, and then Alien and Terminator, and all these movies, and I loved them. And that got me thinking. And then my mom bought me an Apple II Plus, and so that kind of dates me. And I started to program on it, and I kind of realized that I became aware of build time and runtime, and I realized the power that a software architect or developer can have. And I started to think about what if the developer could be augmented? What if the developer was a machine? And that kind of led me to think. And so I always sought out an angle to get involved, and that came way later. Early, as you said, in the days of AI. It was 22 years ago, to be precise, which is very early. When a startup approached me and said, "Hey, we've got this cool piece of technology, but we don't know what to do with it." And this was the company you mentioned, one of them, Zi Corporation. And I'll just tell a little story. We're 25 people. We had this Chinese character building technology using strokes. And we were using this for laptops, but nobody was really interested in this. And then we thought of it as, this predictive grammar technology, can we enhance it to do much more? And can we build not just Chinese characters, but also Chinese words? Can we predict the next word? Can we also transform it into to use it for other languages? And that's what happened. So in 2 years, we went from 25 people to 300. We bought 2 companies. We went from essentially, a quasi-worthless company to 1.5 billion. And in the process, we created one of the first meaningful algorithmic science-based companies. Our technology was predictive grammar. And then that led me to being the CEO of a company called Dejima, which you mentioned as well, which turned the approach to natural language processing on its head. Historically, people thought of NLP as a grammar-based problem, and we thought of it as a semantic-based problem. Where if you can solve the understanding of a domain, then you can solve language. And so we were the first company to apply a knowledge graph approach to NLP. SRI and DARPA went to see us. This is back in the early 2000s in Silicon Valley. And CAiRE was born. CAiRE was a cognitive assistant that learns and organizes. DARPA specified, and the rest is history. This became a spin-off. Spin-off was bought by Apple, and the rest is history. So that was my first foray into AI, and I never looked back. From these early days, 22 years ago, when I lay my hand on that first model, I thought, there's more to this, right? And 22 years later, we're still at the very beginning of this industry.
Yes.
In 50 years, our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids will be still doing more with AI.
Yeah. Actually, I have followed the research at Xerox PARC. I was also working for DARPA projects at the time on communicator projects, conversational AI. So let me, we'll hold that discussion later. Let me go to Charles-Edouard. So you are have a bit of a different kind of profile from our usual webinar speakers. You were consultant for a long time, and then you became an expert in AI, and you are actually leading. You are co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Future Council on AI, right? So that's a bit unusual. And how did you use AI in your consulting career? We also have students from the business school in the audience, right? So how did you use AI in your consulting career? And also, you have written an entire book about AI in 2017. The English translation came out this year, titled "The Fall of the Human Empire." Sounds scary. Since you wrote that in 2017, do you find that any of your prophecies became a reality? So.
Okay, thank you, Pascal, for this very long question. I'm always happy to be with Hong Kong UST. I was on the campus a few months ago, so I really enjoy the view of of the place. I think the students are very lucky. Like Antoine, I mean, we are the same age exactly. I got into the sci-fi, I got into the Apple II Plus program as well. I'm an engineer by training, but then I world consulting MBA from Harvard Business School for many years, and then I was in China, back in 2012, I was writing a book which is called Light Footprint Management: Leadership in Times of Change. And this book had some inspiration from DARPA, from the military, from technology, from sci-fi. And as I was writing this book, first in English, and then it was translated into French and Chinese, I scanned all the technologies that were taking place at that time. And it struck me that artificial intelligence, or as Antoine called it, algorithmic science, was the one that had the most promising future. So then I started to commit to a second book, which was this Fall of the Human Empire, Memoirs of a Robot. And this is how I met Antoine, because I traveled the world from 14 to 16, talking to all the experts across the world, from Jan LeCun, our common friend, to people in Silicon Valley, to people in Europe, to Antoine, to Professor Young in Hong Kong UST, and that's how I wrote this book. So I realized at that time, and the book was released in 17, translated into Chinese. So there's a Chinese version of both Light Footprint and of The Fall of the Human Empire. Having said this, the translation of the first one is not as good as the translation of the second one. It's always the challenge to move books from English to Chinese.
Was it translated by human or by AI system?
At that time, it was still with. Well, okay. Having said this, I had another book that just released, and they tried to use Google Translate to do it faster, and the golden age became the age of gold, which is not the same stuff. Anyway, I'm sure that with the new technology developing, I should have used your algorithm, Pascal.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah. So having said this, I moved slowly into the AI algorithmic science world, starting in 2014, 15, up to the point I'm here today. You asked about the book. So the story of the book, and I will not tell the story because people have to read it, starts in 1956. I was not born. In Dartmouth College with MacArthur and all these guys. And then every year, finishing with a 6, it continues. So basically 56, the beginning. It was the frozen and an era of less development of AI. And then 16, and then 26, and then 38, when is the date of the fall of the human empire. So back to your point on what has been happening around the thing I've been writing on the book. Of course, many of the things I'm writing is in 2026, so we still have 6 years to go. But we have already seen that some of the things I was mentioning, like a portable AI, which is that we are slowly, and we will are slowly human to retake control of our data, to retake control of our decision, and to be enlightened by machine for ourselves, not for third parties. And that's why usually I say that today you all have in your pockets the remote control of your life, not the control of your life, because most of the apps that you are using are on a third party system. So I guess I answered most of your questions.
Yeah, for this part.
So
that was like basically a long introduction of your personal journeys into AI. So now I'm gonna ask some real questions, and then we can discuss. Okay, I guess it's addressed to both of you and also to us. We can discuss this. So what other, so the subtitle of this webinar is the lessons learned, right? What are the useful lessons you have learned from your previous experience in AI industry? And in particular, what are the cultural challenge that you have experienced during your global career? I think I can speak to that because I have seen I've also part of the World Economic Forum's expert group, and I have seen this debate. I would say today it's become like a raging debate since 2016 when we first started talking about ethics and AI, that different cultures just have different concepts, different ideas about what we should do, what we can do, what's going to happen. Very, very different views, right? So in your business career, in your AI, in your investment and so on, in all these different markets, what are the challenges, specific cultural challenges have you encountered? Just feel free to elaborate, to share.
you want to start, Antoine, or I start?
Go ahead, Charles.
No, I mean, I start with the cultural challenges. I mean, like you, Pascale, and like you, Antoine, I've worked and lived in 5 countries, from the west to the east. And
so 5 seems to be the lucky number.
Yes.
Yeah. And what we learn is that in every country where you will go, I mean, students, I tend to say there are 3 elements that you have to understand. And that's why every time I go to a new country, I take a 1-week break and I buy books of history of the country I'm going to. Because, you have to immerse yourself. Because if you think about it, and it's the thesis in one of my book on management, the way you manage, and you will manage the students, and then Pascale and Antoine and myself, we manage based on 3 elements. The first one is what is the government? What are the rules? What are the laws of a country? How it's operating? Because if the country is laissez-faire, or if the country is very directional, you will not work the same way. But this is a given. You cannot decide. I mean, this is the country you decided to live in. That's one parameter. The second parameter is the level of entrepreneurship. If you have people that wake up in the morning and want to be entrepreneur, or merchant, or business driven, or if you have people who are more used to follow and less entrepreneurial, less energy on the entrepreneurship, you will not manage them the same way. And last but not least, and I call it the spirit of the country. What the grandpas and grandmas have been telling the grandchildren on their knees when they were 5 to 12. Because this is the culture, this is the value, this is all the system that is embedded in the way you manage. So that's the way I approach. I mean, this is a bit of a consultant thinking. When I enter a new country, the cultural challenges, they are driven by these 3 elements: the spirit, the land, the government, and the energy. And that's the title of a book I wrote on the Chinese management model a few years ago.
Very interesting. For me, the number 1 thing is the food.
But food is part of the spirit.
Yes, that's true. Antoine?
Yeah, let me talk maybe first to culture. And so I remember you and I talked about it before, Pascale. We talked about our respective, Japanese experience. I remember making an extraordinarily stringent effort to learn the language and learn the culture, and to the point that I became very fluent in both. In Japan, when I lived there in the early 90s, late 80s, both as a student and as a business person. but no matter how hard I tried, I still was an outsider. And so that was a big, big lesson for me. It's not because you speak, it's not because you even try to understand the culture that you are an insider. The exact opposite happened to me in California, where there doesn't matter where you come from. It's you are an insider if you can deliver, if you can relate, and if you can deliver value. And so that was an interesting lesson, and that actually has to be important when people consider where to live and where to work. Whether they're willing to go against or go or be able to manage the difficulties of integration in the country, or if the country welcomes you with open arms. The other interesting culture aspect that I learned moving from countries when I moved from Hong Kong to California. Hong Kong is the land of speed, right? Speed is of the essence in Hong Kong. Everything happens fast. Not always at quality, but happens fast. In California, I remember my very first visit to a pharmacy, and the lady told me, "Oh, you can come back in a few hours to collect your medicine." I say, "Why? Why can I get it now?" "Well, because I have to check the prescription, make sure that it's the right one for me, and so on and so forth." The point is, there's a different relation to speed, and so that's what I learned culture-wise. You can move, you can be very good at what you do. The environment is still going to impose on you constraints. Another question that you asked in the beginning of this line of questions was, what did we learn from our other experiences when it comes to AI? And interestingly, in my case, nothing much. Most of what I learned when building businesses and products and advancing the state of the art in the AI space was learned on the job, and little was learned from the outside. Maybe one exception. I remember I worked for the French Prime Minister for a few years, and in FDI, so foreign direct investment, and we used to interact with very large North Asian corporates, and they were very thorough in the way that they would look at how to deploy the capital, build new facilities outside. So they're very, very thorough. So you had to be yourself extremely thorough and detail focused. And there's one thing that is true still today about any AI projects, is that it's not about pushing the button and magic happens. And as you know, it's not at all like this. It is about scoping the problem very specifically. So being very thorough in the way you scope the problem, being methodical, reducing the number of moving parts, and being super attentive to bias, and generally being extremely thorough. So being an AI practitioner today is not just being good in math and good in programming. It's also being very, very specific and thorough about how you deploy a project and you implement it. And that's something that perhaps one can learn from other professional experiences as well.
So as a multicultural person, as many of our students are, actually all HKUST students are multicultural by definition. Some of them come here from other countries, others from here, they go to other countries. And there are a lot of Chinese students who also start their companies either here in China or in the US, and then many international students who start companies here or in China or back in their home country, right? So as a multicultural person, do you feel that you will be most comfortable, it would be most advantageous to start a company where you are most comfortable culturally, or no, you're shaking your head. So what would you advise our students?
I would definitely say that you have to start a company where you can find the talent, you can find the support, and you can find the market. And it doesn't really matter where you come from. And so that I think anybody who's smart and adaptable will surmount the cultural differences and will be seen as such by the environment. And so what we really should care about is the team, support, and the market.
Do you agree, Sean?
Maybe to build on Antoine and my experience with the AI industry, it's all about a business problem. It's not about technology. It's about solving a problem, whether it's a business or another problem that people need or want to be solved. And when it comes to where you locate yourself, it's all about, is your business idea, is your startup solving a problem in the place you're going to start? Because there's a rule in management or in business is you need to be extremely strong in your home country, wherever you start the company. You know, your core market is where the company is headquartered. You don't start in the Virgin Islands to start a company in the US with a team in China. It doesn't work. You know, you need to have a business problem which is solved, where you are solving it with your company in the market, and you become the market leader or one of the top 2 or 3, because there's no space for more than 2 and 3 in any industry. And the relative market share is that the number 1 wins. And then after, from this base, you can expand. And you should not go to randomly to another country. You should decide the next country based on the business problem similar that can be solved in the same way, where you bring a competitive advantage and you will beat all the local players. That's what we've seen with Uber and some other things. Starting in California, expanded, went to China, then met with Didi, and then they had this competition.
Yes, so very rational, analytical decisions rather than emotional, personal decisions. Thank you so much.
Enjoy the place you are in. You need to enjoy the place you're in, the food, the people, the environment. Otherwise, it makes no sense. Life is too short.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned food again. So the next, so I mentioned in the beginning, you are both managing partners of your investment fund called Alpha Intelligence Capital. Is an acronym AI Capital, I guess. So can you talk to us or the students a little bit about your fund? What kind of startups does your fund invest in, and where are they based? What that's the first question. I'll ask the second question later.
Maybe I start to explain how it was created, and then Antoine can explain about the portfolio and how we build the portfolio.
Sure.
So it was, as I was doing all these interviews and meetings across the world, I came to the realization that AI would become really big. So we're back in 15, 16, end of 16, let's say, beginning of 17. And then I talked to some people that I had a good chemistry with. And Antoine, very naturally, because he was commuting between San Francisco and Hong Kong, I was commuting in between China, Shanghai, and Munich and Paris. So we discussed, and I said, why don't we create a fund, a club, a group of people that are knowledgeable about the industry, that have been in this industry for many years, that understand the business issues, and this club should be global. It should not be a Chinese AI fund. It shouldn't be a European. It shouldn't be. Anyway, we are a global citizen, and it should raise some money and invest in interesting companies. That's how it all got started, with the idea of a global fund, and that's what we're doing. So maybe Antoine, you take from there.
Yes. So it's as Charles said, it's very much the meeting of 2 people and just making this into a reality. We decided early on to focus on deep technology. We wanted to be. This was the beginning of all this hyped AI phase, where you and I, Pascale and Charles, we were pioneers in many ways. We started in AI very early, but then towards 14 or so, AI became a buzzword, and so everybody and their neighbor were enabling their company with AI, right, quote unquote AI. So we decided, okay, there's how do we both from an investment standpoint, but also positioning wise, how do we differentiate? And I think one of the very important decisions we made early on was, okay, we're going to look for people who not just use AI, but do AI. In other words, deep algorithmic science expert who can push the state of the art of the mathematics and the programming science and software architecture science, and then apply this successfully to solving an actual business problem. So it's not about just technology, for sure. That's never enough. But it's about using deep, advanced science to solve an actual and real life business problem. So do AI versus use AI. very important to us. We are sector agnostic, so we look at any industry, and we have companies in cybersecurity, in computer vision, in data management, in quantum computing, in healthcare and biotech, in insurance and fintech. So it runs the gamut, even in entertainment, as in music, for example. So we really is very diversified. And in terms of global footprint, I mean, Charles said it, right? We're a global fund. So our teams are in San Francisco, in Hong Kong, in Paris, and we have some offshoots in London and in Israel. But our companies are also global, right? So roughly half of our portfolio is in the US, and the rest is more or less evenly split between China, Israel, and Europe.
I will ask questions about these different markets later. So please, Charles-Edouard.
Sorry?
So I say I will ask about those questions on those markets later, but now you can elaborate on what Antoine said about your fund. So what kind of, so there's a question, I know the students always want to know, what kind of characteristics you look for in the company to invest? Many of our students are thinking of, or already started, actually many of our students already started AI companies, startups in China, in Hong Kong. I guess perhaps one of the most famous entrepreneurship story from our university is DJI, the drone company. Of course, they actually, not many people thought of them as an AI company, but actually their automatic navigation algorithm is an AI algorithm. So that enabled their success. So our students, were looking for, hoping for a second DJI from HKUST, right? So what do you think, what are you looking for when you look at a company or startup? What are the characteristics?
And if there is a second DJI to happen at HKUST, we will be the one to fund it. So just let us know.
Really, I remember helping DJI to raise money in the early days. They couldn't convince people to invest in them. They were ultimately at the beginning funded by two professors, my colleagues, and I didn't, unfortunately, but there were two professors who funded them at the beginning. For many years, they were not able to convince people to invest in them because it was so new. Actually, it was so weird, right? Nobody heard of consumer drones and so on. So what do you look for in, how can you even discover a second DJI? It's gonna be a company that nobody else understands, right?
Yeah. I mean, so we look for three things. We look for, number one, a foundational technology, a piece of technology that's different, that pushes the boundaries of the science to date, right? Number one. Number two, we look for teams that understand both deep technology, but also the domain, right? So that combination of domain expertise, so understanding the problem and the industry, and also understanding the deep technology related aspects to solving that problem. That's the second thing. And the third thing we look for is something that is transformative. So not just something that does an existing thing a little better, but something that will really transform an industry, whether it's a business model, whether it's a completely new product or way to see the world or new service. We look for things that will make a big difference, that can scale into being global, large leaders, and sometimes create new markets. So those are the three things we look for.
Maybe to build on Antoine, we are a tech-driven fund because we took the decision to be tech experts first on the team, and that's the first filter. So we don't want Me Too type of technology or people who just hype into AI. And again, as Antoine said, it's all about the founders, the quality, their resilience, their ability to bridge between business and technology. And at the end of the day, it's the business that you can do. Is there a business problem that is solved by this company? Otherwise, it's going to stay as a research project.
So yeah, well, to tag along on the, to follow up on your last point, then, our students here, even when DJI was funded, they were engineering students. They are engineering students, right? Do you advise that they should then look for, partner with let's say business experts or business school students. I mean, it's very hard. Usually, this typical story of two founders in the garage, right? They're schoolmates, engineers, and they're all engineers. So how do you think that, have you seen cases where, like a pure engineer, a founding team actually managed to understand the business? And if they didn't at the beginning, how can they learn? How can they learn to become more market driven, like from technology driven to market driven? I've also seen cases in previous, in my experience, where the VCs who invested in the company would parachute some MBAs into the founding team, and it didn't work, right? Because they really were not in the same culture. So what have you seen that that can help engineering founded companies to become more market driven and business savvy?
Yeah, maybe I can start. First, I don't think it's necessarily about the kind of diploma that you have, right? It's not about having an MBA versus having an engineering degree. I think it's really about whether you care about solving a real life problem. Are you market driven? Are you customer centric? If you're just happy to do research, just do research. But if you want to make a difference out there and solve people's problem and be paid for it, that's a different attitude, and that's what you have to have, right, in order to be an entrepreneur. And there are plenty of examples of companies that were led entirely by scientists and technologists.
Right.
An example of this is SenseTime in China, in which we happen to be an investor. I think every C-suite individual in SenseTime has a computer science degree. And yet it's a very successful market-driven company, right? So I think, and the list goes on, right? In the US, the same thing. So degree will not dictate your attitude. You will dictate your attitude. The degree just helps it.
Yes, I think it's to build on Antoine. It's about eagerness. You have an eagerness inside of you to solve a problem. You have a compelling energy that brings you out of yourself, out of the lab, to meet people and say, you know what, Grandpa, you wanted to fix this, I'm going to fix your whatever, your wheelchair, and that's what we see the difference between people who just invent and people who do. So this is the right equilibrium. And as Antoine said, Grandpa needs to give something. Otherwise, it's just charity business. And unfortunately, we don't finance charity business. There are other means of financing charity business.
Yeah. So having said that, actually, I would like to invite you to perhaps give some kind of idea what you are interested in terms of opportunities for AI startups for our students. Whatever you can think of, or what you're seriously thinking about. What are the industries? We know that AI can be applied in many industries, right? So what are the promising directions you think there are, and the best opportunities and so
on? Charles, you want to start?
Yeah, I can get started. I mean, there are a couple. I mean, you can find interesting AI startups almost everywhere, because as I wrote in the book, that's why we have the risk of the fall of the human empire, what AI is doing. And by the way, artificial intelligence is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as artificial intelligence. There's intelligent, there's artificial, and these two things have been connected by accident. There is algorithmic science that solves problems or gives insights. Having said this, so that will diffuse everywhere. Where you can make a big difference is in high volume activities, small ticket, high volume, where humans just get overwhelmed. And then the algorithmic science will allow you to see through 1 million transactions, 1 million information, 1 billion information, and give you something. Or high value added task, an enormous problem that is worth millions of dollars that you cannot solve, because in order to solve it, you need to get information from everywhere, from the weather forecast to the size of the moon to the Amazonia forest. And this information, you cannot as a human grab it. So I tend to say that it's either big volume and you're solving it, or high value added that you are bringing the insights to. But of course, there are many rules. I'm sure that Antoine can add many cases.
Antoine?
Yeah, I will say that up until recently, I thought that AI would have problems addressing the heavily regulated markets, such as finance or healthcare. But I see this changing now, which is quite remarkable. And so to echo Charles' words, it's really everywhere. And to give you a sense of where the kind of things that we see in different jurisdictions around the world, in the US, we see a lot in enterprise software and data management, in online marketing, and I think that's in sales management, so sales funnel, pipeline, and all this lead generation. We see a lot in biotech as well. We see a lot in AI chip design. So those are interesting areas. In China, obviously, we see a lot of computer vision and offshoots of that. We see a lot in retail, a lot in consumer as well. And increasingly, we see interesting things in the manufacturing space, as in quality assurance, but more generally process management, maintenance, and so on and so forth. In Europe, we've seen quite a bit in insurance, in logistics and transportation. You would expect that in edge computing. And Israel, sort of where we also invest, we see a lot in cybersecurity. And so if you go through all of these, right, then you can see that essentially every single industry in the world is being transformed. And it's bits and pieces, right? It's initially one process or one service or one decision. And as markets and corporates and users become more comfortable, then over time this percolates, and then entire industries and markets are created.
Maybe also an additional point. What we see, because we are global, is that a lot of people think they're alone and they have the best idea in the world. And it's like in the internet era where everyone wants to do the website. So I think first make sure that don't think you are the best one, and because you're competing with the world, from China to the US to Europe. On the other hand, what we see is that execution is very important. Execution, go-to-market, ability to grab clients and move from $1 to $10 to $100 million revenue. And that's what really makes a difference. So don't think you're alone, but get the traction fast.
So another thing is for the students, right? If they're interested in pitching to you, how do they contact you?
We have a very simple email address, which is AB for Antoine at aicapital.ai. And for me, it's CEB at aicapital.ai. So it's very simple. CEB at
aicapital.ai. I'm typing
the and that's my initials, and for one is the same.
AB at aicapital.ai.
Yeah.
So I just
for the anecdote, when we started the venture with Antoine and we were thinking of the idea, there were so many names available on .ai.
Yes.
But AI Capital was an easy one. But now, if you want to have a .ai, it's like a nightmare, because I think it's a bit like the internet, the .com.
Yeah. So all right, so thank you for that. I'm sure you will get emails from our students and so on. So coming back to one of my favorite questions, all right, all those questions I like them, but this is perhaps one of my favorite, especially for these panelists. Comparing China, Europe, US, North America, and India, all right, these big markets. What are the pros and cons in each region and the added value for each of the market? What are the different AI opportunities, since you have experience in all these markets, also in India, I heard, right? So what are the, I know there are a lot of regulatory differences and so on, but just feel free to elaborate and share your, whatever comes to mind.
I'll start perhaps. So I'll try to give you the pros and cons of the territories in which we operate. India, we just started, so I will not pretend that I know it. But so the US, it's our biggest market, remains the biggest market in AI for sure. What you have in the US, which is fairly unique, is you have quality at quantity. There's a lot of quality and there's a lot of quantity of quality, right? It's very unique this way. It's obviously super strong in enterprise software. It's very innovative in terms of within the enterprise space, product creation and service creation. The downside of the US, high costs. So HR is now very costly, not just in Silicon Valley, but in other places as well. So that's that. China, we've seen really high quality projects as well. Not as many as in the US, but high quality. Very strong in consumer, I mentioned it, and there's a willingness to innovate in sectors where innovation has been traditionally very difficult, such as finance or healthcare. The downside of China is that there's too much money, chasing too few projects, too few high quality projects, and the net outcome of this is that the valuations are out of whack. So entrepreneurs think that they are going to make a lot of money too quickly. Where one of the big quality of an entrepreneur is be patient. Don't solve for money, solve for value, right? Europe, we see a lot of quantity, lower HR costs as well, but and lower valuations. The downside, the markets, because they are a single country at the beginning, are typically smaller, and the markets are unregulated, so innovation can be stifled, right? And then Israel, last but not least, it's called itself the startup nation, and not for nothing. It's brimming with innovation energy, and the level of adaptability of Israelis is very high. So another thing about Israel is that they don't look at themselves as being selling to an Israeli market. Immediately upon setting up a company, they typically do it with team members that are from both sides of the Atlantic, so Israelis and Americans, and very quickly they look at the US market as their outlet for sales. The downside, very limited experience in terms of scaling, so you still have very few companies that have scaled big in Israel, and that's still going to be the case, I think, in a foreseeable future. And then the second issue is, just like in China, there's a lot of money chasing projects, so the valuations can get out of whack as well.
Maybe to complement on Antoine, it's also a matter of speed. Antoine started the story with Hong Kong being faster than the US. When it comes to AI in the US, I would say it's grow fast, die fast. Because people invest, they put a ticket, 5, 10, expecting you to do something. There are enough quality projects, you don't deliver, you die fast. And there are companies specialized. I mean, we have not started this activity because it's not really our mantra. Caretakers that are just caretaking of technology, because these VC are just, they don't have time to take care of their body bags. If you think about China, it's even faster up and faster and slower down, because a lot of zombie companies are being still fueled because they've been invested by people that put big tickets, so they cannot really die. When it comes to Europe, it's slow and slow. Slow growth, slow dying. So it takes so much time to go up. It takes so much time for the company to die, but because it just have, public aids and so on. So I think it's also the speed of the curve. So the US market is an advantage because it's grow fast, die fast. So it separates very easily. My personal motto for managing is aggressively patient. That's what I learned from China. So I will encourage all the entrepreneurs or even the people on that webinar to think that you have to be aggressive, you have to be out, you have to have a purpose. But you have to be patient, because you don't build your degree in 1 minute, because otherwise Pascale will just distribute degree at the entrance. And at the same time, it's over time that you build your experience. Another thing which is separating the different zones is, Antoine mentioned it, is the size of the data. Data in Europe is GDPR, which is a blessing and a curse. It's a curse because there's a lot of constraint, there's limitation, personal. It's a blessing because if you build AI models and AI products that are serving the consumers individually, you can be very sticky. And that's something that we see emerging. On the other side, in China and in the US, massive amount of data. So you can really harvest. You can harvest the remote control of your life. I mean, on the other side. On the other hand, in the long run, that's what I wrote in the book, in 2026, maybe earlier, everyone will want to at least have a control of their personal, very intimate data. And nobody wants to share all your what I mean is personal life. Where you are, what you do outside is part of living in the city. But what you are doing personally, in terms of food preferences or whatever, is up to you. And that's something that we see a trend of all over the world of people wanting to kind of keep their privacy, some of their privacy. They want to have security and safety. We've seen it with COVID, but they want to have a piece of privacy on their core things, emotions and stuff. So I think that's the advantage of Europe, but that's also the curse for the time being.
So that's how you're comparing. What I find interesting is that two of the most perhaps successful or valuable, at least one of the most valuable AI startup is SenseTime you invested in. A startup from Chinese University of Hong Kong. And DJI, of course, started from our university, University of Science and Technology of Hong Kong. And they both, SenseTime, basically, actually, they were speaker at our last webinar. They talked about their story. They got their first break from serving the Chinese market. And DJI, I remember the story very well because they were our students and I was there witnessing. They were successful. They became successful. The first, I would say, a real success. It was after 6 years of the company was funded already. And they got their break from drone technology being used by Hollywood. So Hollywood was using the drone to film movies. I remember still 2012, they showed us Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise movie. It was shot with their drone. That was the first drone, footage, a major movie that was shot with their drone. And then the rest was history. But then, Hollywood was using DJI drone. You would see DJI drone in all the sitcoms and so on. So they got their first, actually for the first few years at that time, nobody knew DJI was a Chinese company or even a Hong Kong company. I remember going to Consumer Electronics Show, all their salespeople there were not Asian, all right? Nobody knew it was so it's very interesting. One basically got their break in China market, the other one in the US market, and both are Hong Kong founded companies. So this is kind of a reflection of what you guys said earlier, which is that you need to solve the problem where the problem is, right? No matter where you are. And then, of course, both companies today are facing different regulatory challenges. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like this, once do you have to care about these things, like the regulatory? You mentioned GDPR, right? But also recently we saw this kind of sanctions from the US against Chinese AI companies and so on. Should people be worried about this? Or is it useful to worry about it?
I mean, to start, I mean, it's not an easy question. It's somehow part of the game. AI is a global play. As we discussed, and Antoine said, you have to start somewhere. You have to start in your core market where you will be a winner. And the company you mentioned were winners in their own market. They built a very strong base, cost position, market position. After, and it was the same with the oil companies and any company in the past, as you expand, there is sometimes tension, history, whatever, between the leaders or between the countries or between the culture of country you're going to. When you're going to the Middle East, when you're going from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, now it's China and US, but this tension exists all over the world. And I think that's one thing that I would not care about at the beginning. If your business ID and your technology is able to grab a significant market share of a business problem which has value in your own market, you will be a definite winner, because you will either be bought by the global player that wants to have the China market, if you're in China, or you will expand and buy some other companies or do alliances. You know, I mean, the best example is airlines. Why do airlines have a frequent flyer program? And why was Kohlberg who invented this many years ago? Because you cannot buy another airline. American airline will never buy Air France. Air France will never buy Air China. So you might have some small stakes. And that's nothing to do with technology. It has to do with the mental pride that you want to be able to control your airlines. And whether it's Hong Kong, I mean, we still have an airline company. Of course, there are some links. And you have the Singaporean, you have the French, you have even poor country wants to have their own airline. So I'm taking this example, which is apolitical, because it's a pure example that anyone can succeed, successfully or not, but this constraint will be for everyone, any industry.
So maybe you're saying it's a good problem to have. That means you're already in a leadership position. If people understand.
Yes, when you start to have this type of problem, it means that you have already harvested your own country. Of course, if you started in Maldives, that may be a big problem for you. But if you started in China, US, or France or Germany, you're in good shape.
Okay.
No, I agree. Look, as maybe I'll just say that as investors, we are fortunate to be global and be able to deploy capital everywhere. But almost never we have the problem of a company being constrained from being in a particular market. That only comes way later when, as Charles said, you're already well established and you're dominant, and then people start to care about you because you're dominant. Right?
Thank you. So now we come to, this is also one of my favorite questions as director of CAiRE. I ask all the our webinar speakers this question. So how can we strike up, in your view, you can, how do we strike a balance between innovation and ethics in the AI industry? So the companies we mentioned all have had or still have ethical challenges. And, what are the different or similar approaches in ethics in AI in China, Europe, and US you have seen? So Charles-Edouard, since you're co-chairing the World Economic Forum on the AI Council, so perhaps you can answer this question first. And then
yes, I start. We have done a lot of workshops on the topic, as
yes.
you know. First point, which I always remind the readers in my books and in the speeches or in the talks, humans have never been able to stop any technology, however unethical or lethal it was. We have not stopped the nuclear weapons, we have not stopped the bioweapons, and we will not stop AI, whatever form it will take. So having said this, it's like, you can try, but it's like water, it will infiltrate your home if you're surrounded by the water, first. Second of all, we are trying, and it's a very interesting discussion, to bring artificial intelligence, this oxymoron, with ethics. And I have a lot of CEOs, we have a lot of clients that are telling us, oh, how do we make sure that it's explainable? And very often my answer is, when it comes to intelligence, and to all the students, all the people on that webinar, we are all black boxes. Our significant other, our boss, our children, our cousin, the pharmacist, is not asking us how we made this decision to enter this pharmacy at 5 p.m. And we're asking the AI to do this, to explain us, okay, why did you make the car enter at 5 p.m.? I was just walking by, I wanted to go to bakery, and I saw the pharmacist, I need to buy some pills, I bought the pills. So the first thing which I think we should not forget is this oxymoron, and the fact that we are trying to make something that we cannot explain ourselves be explainable. And that's, I'm not saying that we should not deal with ethics, because we should deal with ethics. This is the most important topic that needs to be linked with business. Business cannot be unethical, but business doesn't have to solve all the problem of ethics, because it's part of the human problems. So maybe I hand over to Antoine on some of the detailed issues that we are facing, but that's my thought, because yes, you have to face innovation and ethics, but innovation has never been stopped, how unethical it could be. And I've not talked about stem cells and other stuff that are being done all over the world, and the DNA changes, and also the vaccine. And on the other hand, yes, we need to put ethics at the forefront of business. We are very ethical investors. We have ESG at heart, and we cannot do innovation at any cost. But we have to bear in mind that this is the way the world is moving. Antoine?
Yeah, so I think it's very hard to introduce ethics at the level of the AI toolset or AI holistically, right? Just like Charles mentioned, we haven't introduced ethics at the level, at a holistic level of the human brain. We cannot regulate the human brain. We have ethical rules that apply to how the brain instantiate its power in different settings or circumstances. And so by the very same token, we have to do the same with AI. So we're not going to regulate or declare that AI is ethical or unethical. We're not going to say that a neural network or genetic algorithm or random forest or SVM is ethical or unethical. What we're going to do is we're going to say, well, in finance, this is what is ethical and unethical. And within the context of finance, the ways that AI is deployed and productized is ethical or unethical. So ethical regulation has to be industry specific, and we will regulate differently finance to healthcare, to biotech, and other things. And so regulation and ethical understanding, in my view, has to be industry specific, not holistic, if that makes sense.
Yes. So in my experience, so I have participated in a lot of these forums with the EU, with the World Economic Forum in the US, and also in China with Chinese companies. I've had a lot of dialogues with different groups, different people in AI. I do see, what struck me was that whenever I'm in EU, the ethics and privacy was always the keyword, like the most frequently used keyword. The discussions about AI was almost always driven by this concern. And whereas in China, there's a very practical kind of perspective where they say, okay, perhaps because all these drivers of AI applications are engineers, they're all very practical. They say, okay, we look at what the product is doing and see if there's a problem, we're gonna fix it. There's not so much of a philosophical discussion about AI ethics, but of course, everybody agrees that AI's products needs to be safe, needs to safeguard people's privacy. I don't think there's a lot of difference in the practical side between these different countries, even US, China, but there's a lot of difference in terms of philosophical discourse, what people are talking about. The US is somehow in between, right? Because I remember also as a PhD student in AI, all of us were and continue to be funded by DARPA, which is a military application of AI. Actually, all the AI technology, whether it's in speech recognition, in computer vision, or natural language processing, machine translation, were all funded initially by the American defense industry because they needed that for national security. But the consequence is that these technologies are later on applied for a lot of beneficial use in the civilians, right? So there's a debate also within the AI scientific community about whether we should self-censor, what kind of research we do, what kind of project, what kind of funding. This is really a debate. And my personal view is that, so the example being that we cannot foretell what kind of benefits or even what kind of bad consequence, unintended bad consequences each AI technology can have, because so we cannot at the beginning say we're not going to do this and that. So I agree with both of you that innovation leads the way. And then from the application side, then each industry, then there will be industry specific governance and regulations. So I think we're all, three of us are on the same page, which is amazing. There's no debate here.
Yeah, go on, Pascale.
Yeah, go on.
Now, to be I was referring at the beginning of the conversation on the Light Footprint Management book, and which is about the military.
Yes.
And if you think about the world of tomorrow, is being first shaped, and Antoine started with this, by sci-fi. And sci-fi is science fiction. It's science fiction. It's not fiction. It's science fiction. So everyone in this room who has an engineering background can do sci-fi because it's imagining what could be the future of technology. These people see the future. And if you look at Asimov and the others, they wrote incredible things of today.
Yes.
Then the second one is DARPA and the military.
Yeah.
Because they have an objective. It's not like an airline, is to protect a country. So it's you cannot lose a war. The next one are the people in investment and business in the technology. So having said this, on one of the points that you mentioned on AI, why is AI a big thing about ethics? Because we are using data to do algorithm. And as I said at the beginning, because we are black boxes, these data reflect the black boxes of human, the biased. We can be racist. They can be location where you have more chances of becoming delinquent than others. It depends on how much money you had when you were a kid, you know, the neighborhoods. So there are a lot of bias which are captured in the data that will be used by an algorithm which is honest, and then it will replicate the bias. So it will make sure that people who cannot have a loan because it was difficult will never get another loan, and people who got a loan will get a bigger loan. And therefore, it will separate people. And that's a big question we have, but that's not an AI ethic problem. It's back to Antoine. It's a human problem.
Yes.
So we have to fix our society instead of asking the AI engineers to fix the algorithm and include new bias to fix humanity instead of saying, okay, yes, we have to work on people who are poorly educated. We have to work on people that cannot have access to loans. We have to help people who don't have access to a home and a mortgage and education. And this is nothing to do with AI. It has to do with the bias and how human society has been built over the last 2,000 years.
Yes. I think this year has shown us a very clear case of cultural differences and ethical differences, ethical value differences, because we cannot convince, one society cannot convince another society that you should wear masks. And it's such a simple thing, and you know, we cannot convince each other. So so I think it's time for us to go to the questions from the audience, and then after the Q&A session, I will invite the panelists again to say to give a last advice to our students. So let me read the question. So this first question is, how would you describe the difference of VCs in Hong Kong and US during your journey on funding and operating startups in these two different regions, Hong Kong and US? Yeah, Hong Kong. So we talk about China now. Like, as multicultural people, we somehow all end up spending a lot of time in Hong Kong, right? Because Hong Kong seems to be the place where, for people who cannot make up our minds where we want to be. So we're in Hong Kong. Right. So so this question is about, you know, how VCs differ in Hong Kong, US, or yeah.
Antoine?
How different was it to build in Hong Kong and the US?
It says the VCs.
The VCs.
Okay. The question is about the VC world.
Yeah, the VC world.
So, you know, obviously the US is extremely well equipped with funds, and it's an extraordinarily dynamic VC industry. Hong Kong is nascent, but because Hong Kong has one very clear benefit to itself, which is that it's a strong financial center, and it's an attractive city. You can attract a lot of interesting talent to Hong Kong. Plus, there's something that has happened over the last 10 years which didn't exist here in Hong Kong before, and that's called Shenzhen. So right across the border, there's a massive metropolis that is full of entrepreneurs with very successful companies, vibrant technology ecosystem, which 20 years ago was a manufacturing, and which is deep technology. And so there's a good reason why VCs should set up here, just if only to service Shenzhen and an emerging Hong Kong technology industry. and just more China in general and Southeast Asia. So you can build something that's regional here, but as we did, you can also build something that's global, and then leverage Hong Kong's status as a financial center. Being in the US, however, if you want to invest in the US is paramount. So you cannot really not be in the US, in the Silicon Valley, especially if you want to invest in a valley. That's why we also operate from San Francisco. Other than that, I can tell you the way to make money in the US is the same way as you make money in Hong Kong. You have to be very diligent. You have to look at the criteria that I mentioned, the team, the business project, the support, the market, all of this. Those things are the same. So we don't behave differently. The companies in which we invest are different, but our criteria are the same.
And back to the point we discussed, it is very difficult to make Hong Kong market. You can make it Hong Kong and China, but you can't make it Hong Kong. And that's what DJI did. And also that's why Sensient did.
Yes, it's basically the Greater Bay Area. I think the first entry. Yes, yes. But we can see Hong Kong as part of the Greater Bay Area here, as part of Hong Kong, Macau, Shenzhen, and so on. And so we are not so small, if we think of it that way, right? So another question, which add-ons, I guess that means features or characteristics, which add-ons can make one business have an edge over another?
I can start. There are a couple of add-ons. The first one is, as Antoine said, you need to have a business value. So it's not an add-on, but it's something which is key. In the age of AI, the challenge is that people have a tendency to sell one project or one product, and it's not repeatable. So it needs to be sticky. Your product needs to be sticky in order to stay with the customers. Otherwise, there's no way you ramp up your business from 1 to 10 to 100 million. You will keep having new clients. And then after, we believe with Antoine that acquisition of talents and acquisition of companies can be instrumental to transform some of these AI companies when they're missing some pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to echo and double down on this, very often, AI startups can build features as opposed to build products or services, and nobody's going to make a big market if you develop a feature. Let me give you an example. So there's a lot of companies that are trying to make a living in the medical imaging industry. The perception is the medical imaging industry is a very crowded space. The AI-enabled medical imaging industry is a crowded space. But in reality, the companies that actually built the algorithmic models and then productize that into a full-blown service that is actually usable by doctors and hospitals, and then go all the way to get regulatory approval from the FDA, for example, in the US, those companies are very few. And we've happened to invest in a company called AI Doc based in Israel that is very big now in the US. They're the only company in the US to be approved for 6 different pathologies in a medical imaging space. And they're deployed across hundreds of hospitals in the US. To go all the way and build this takes a lot of effort. And it's not just about building the feature, the algorithmic model. It's about building the entire suite of product, understanding the behavior of doctors, talking to them, injecting that into the product, and then going to the FDA and proving to them that it actually is useful. It's going to have it's auditable, right? And it's going to make a difference. And so don't think when we speak of add-on, go all the way to product and service. Don't stop at just making a difference in terms of a feature or a model.
Great. So another question. Thanks for the insightful talk. When assessing a potential investment or startup, how much of the financials of the company do you take into consideration? Is there any proper metric that a company should pass?
Well, so it depends on the status or the state of the business. If it's early, right, very early, typically the financials are broadly irrelevant. The business model, how you think about you're going to go to market and how you're going to price, that's important, of course. But in the very early stages, you won't have much proof for that. You'll have conjectures, but not proof. So, we tend to invest both early and late. In the early stages, very early stages, it's not very relevant. In the mid to late stage, it becomes very relevant, and it's not just revenue; it's the gross margin. So, how much does it cost to deliver your service? Whether it's repeatable. There are important SaaS metrics if you're a SaaS business. So, are your clients churning, or are you keeping them? Your net retention figures are important. And how quickly you can grow and scale your revenue. And frankly, when do you get to actually making money, being profitable and growing your bottom line? Eventually, you've got to make money. Every business has to make money in due course.
Yes, and we look also at IP. And as Antoine said, ability to make money at some stage.
All right, so there's a question that's also maybe on the reverse side of this, which is, what would make you, and as an investor, hesitant to invest? What are the things that make you afraid to invest? What are the risks that you will avoid?
Get started, maybe, Antoine?
Yes.
Yeah. As it's a very delicate investment, because you have to find the right strike balance between the technology as a breakthrough dimension, it has solving a business problem, it can scale. Any red flag or yellow flag will get the thing out, because we have enough critical paths that needs to be on and green to avoid that on the side there are some issues with the brand is not inside, the idea inside, the two founders have been fighting each other or whatever. So we are trying really to yellow flag and red flag things that and they are no go, because we are looking at many startups, and Antoine can give some numbers every day and every week. We had a call this morning from 7 to 10 CET, and we cover all the ground. So we cannot take, even if the company is great technology, great business problem, traction, any yellow flag is a red flag. Antoine?
Yeah, very well said. So, essentially every single little thing will kill the deal, right? So, because there's just too many opportunities. We're very fortunate, I'm in Hong Kong, but I spend a lot of time in the US. We're very fortunate to have a lot of deal flow. And so the luxury that we have is that we can pick and choose. And so everything being equal, if there's a slight difference, if there's a yellow flag, as Charles said, then we'll kill that. Now, what could those be? They could be, the customer didn't renew, or the CEO was not able to hire his head of sales, or the prior investor in his prior startup is bad-mouthing the CEO. So there's a lot of little things like this that will get you off, and that's what it is.
And that's why there is a high failure rate. And that's why we know when you are entering these entrepreneurship stories and you want to raise money, say, I'm 80%, 95K. No, you need to be 100% okay. Any yellow flag, as I said, is a red flag. And in normal life, it's okay. You get recruited, you have a yellow flag. In red flag, you don't get recruited. A yellow flag. But in VC, we cannot take a yellow flag, because yellow flag becomes red flag very quickly.
And at the same time, I'll tell you, Pascale, there's no such thing as a perfect project, right? No. Never, right? So it's not like we're going to check every single box. It's completely impossible. So at the end of the day, VC is also about taking a risk.
Mm-hmm. It's called venture.
But I think when we talk about flags, we're talking about flags on people, issues, IP. We're not talking about the fact that it's the perfect technology, the perfect business problem to be solved, and the perfect pricing and the perfect traction. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Great. So here's a question, another question, which is interesting, I think, both as an investor and then as an entrepreneur. What are your daily habits, your continuing strategies to keep up to date with innovations and rapidly developing technologies?
Well, maybe I'll start. So it's talking to entrepreneurs. Obviously we get the industry material every day in our inboxes. We get that. We go to conferences, we talk to people. But effectively, we see something like 200 companies or more a year, and we will invest in 5% or even less, right? 3% of them, and so, but we still get to learn from the 95 or 97% others in which we didn't invest. And that's talking to entrepreneurs and scientists and technologists keeps us in the loop. And it's I say this in all humility, it's a very rewarding job. Because you get to see the future, and you gotta love it.
All right.
To add on Antoine, I mean, it's a mix of systematic, inbox analysis and stuff, and random. And you need to have sensors all over the world and be listening. I think we have a tendency to be overwhelmed by information and data. So you need to sense, oh, this is interesting. And that's the job. Mm-hmm. So systematic and intuitive.
That sounds not easy.
Nothing is easy in life. That's why you're teaching your students.
Of course.
That's why you're doing a webinar.
Yeah. Doing the webinar is not that easy. On medical image, so this is a very concrete question here. On medical image AI, we have not seen a large and successful profitable company like SenseTime. What do you think is the biggest challenge for the growth of a medical AI company? I would say something first about that because I'm very interested in that. I think the regulatory issue is something you have to overcome. You cannot just say, oh, I can do this, and therefore you will be allowed to do it. So I think the regulatory, you also earlier mentioned that, right?
Yeah.
So to be compliant in the health and medical industry is very, very important. But what are your opinions about not seeing any huge success? So
precisely because of what you mentioned, it's still very early days. I used to be extremely skeptical 2 or 3 years ago. I thought there's no way we're going to invest in anything that touches healthcare.
Yeah.
Anything. And I thought the reason why it was the case is because essentially the profession, right? The regulators and even consumers, the users would not feel very good if the machine is diagnosing you, providing diagnosis for you. Yeah. I think this is changing. Mm-hmm. And so, but it's changing at the pace of the willingness of regulators to inject some innovation in the process. But as I see these companies, whether it's in healthcare or biotech, starting to break that ceiling, that regulatory ceiling, we can see value being created. Now, regulation works both ways, right? It prevents you to grow fast, but once you're there, it protects you from the competition because the competition also has to go through the same process. So the early winners in the space, it is quite possible that this is a early winner take all type of a market where the first 1, 2, or 3 actually win that market. And so I would not be the one here to bet against medical imaging being big. I think it will be big. And the companies that succeed in this space early on will be massively valuable, in my view.
So it is actually a very big entry barrier, right? If you can create that entry barrier, then you have a win.
Correct.
Right. I think another reason in the medical area is the lack of homogeneous data. The data source. There's a huge promise in precision medicine using machine learning, but there is no large-scale database for machines to learn from. Still.
Yeah, and also there is the acceptance on the part of the profession. So I'm going to come back to AI Doc for a second. You know, what's interesting about them is that not only do they work on the image itself, right? So they have a deep fundamental computer vision based analysis of the image, but they also work on behavior of the radiologist and a doctor. So they understand how a doctor is going to look at an image and what he or she does well and what he or she does not well. And they can learn from the best, right? And they can provide feedback from the not so good to the not so good. And in doing that, actually, they are getting a lot of brownie points from the profession because they will actually catch the false positives, and they will, you know, not just save people's lives, but also save people's jobs.
Wonderful. So there are two questions from two entrepreneurs. Okay, I will read the first question. Being a new company, is a better idea to start our business from a cheap HR countries such as India, as capital for developed countries is huge. Thanks.
Charles.
I can start. I mean, AI is not about being cheap, as we said. It's about the market you're addressing and the business problem. So technically, if you have great Indian people that are motivated and that you can keep, and your market is in India or elsewhere, it could work. But we will not recommend to scatter the team all over the world at the early stage of a startup, because it's all about people working together and going after a market. So if the value you can bring is significant, you can pay the people below. And it's all a matter of how you finance yourself as well, and valuation. So don't raise too much at a too high valuation too fast, because then you can afford all this non-Indian. But on the other hand, just don't think that you're going to raise little money and then do a cheap solution from India, because you will also have some gaps.
Antoine?
Yeah, you know, I have only seen one example of a company that does HR cost arbitrage on the AI side so far, and it's an interesting company. And I think there's some value to being able to offshore some of your process for sure. But at the end of the day, you know, it's still a highly creative endeavor where you need people to be together, know each other well. You need the domain experts to be very close to the technologists and scientists and the data scientists. So all of that sort of, you know, means that you've got to be close by. Of course, in the age of COVID, where, you know, a lot of people are interacting online, it's a bit difficult to say, and it could seem to be counterintuitive, but this thing will stop at some point. And we'll be able to see each other again and just work together again, as we always have. And at that point, people will discover is that face-to-face trumps, you know, video still, and we'll continue to do, especially in highly creative endeavors like what this is about.
So you're advocating for quality of people and talent rather than quantity of cheaper labor.
Correct. Small teams, you know, small teams of very motivated, high quality individuals can move mountains.
And compact together, because back to the point, if these 5 or 10 Indians can leave tomorrow morning with the codes or whatever, that's a yellow flag. No matter how cheap they are. You know, you don't outsource, and if they were outsourced, I've seen this in another company, it's very dangerous. So don't outsource. I mean, you can outsource APP because of a website. You don't outsource your AI algorithm.
You can either, in a way. So another question from another entrepreneur. We have just created our financial trading company and predict cryptocurrency markets with the help of AI. My question is, how do you currently value AI companies? They have a strong
at the right price.
Huh? Yeah, I think I will advise that this audience member to email directly to to the two
Yes.
panelists. Okay, you
And
can.
the value is always market based, right?
Yeah.
There's a taker and there's an offer, and
And the seller.
you've been in the middle.
Right. So there's another question. What will AI and 5G bring new opportunity to online education? AI and 5G. What new opportunity can they bring to online education?
So, I can maybe start. I mean, actually, China is way ahead in this space and has done super well. I mean, it's very impressive. So, I used to also be a bit of a skeptic when it comes to online education, simply because I thought, okay, how good can the experience be? Well, it turns out that the experience can be pretty good, can be highly personalized, can be not just in terms of the interaction, but also the curriculum can be personalized. I've seen recently companies in India starting to take this up and doing very well at it. So I think it's a massive opportunity, and AI will be a big contributor to online education. And I would start there with the countries that actually are most innovative and also really care about education, and that starts with Asia. So, so if I were to build an AI-enabled online education company, I would do it right here in Asia, not anywhere else, and then we'll go out to conquer the world after that. And what can AI do? AI can do a lot. So first of all, it can work on attention, so feedback. Are people paying attention? Is the teacher doing a good job? Does he have the interest of the audience? It can work on specific topics being brought up at the right time. So specifying or scoping the types of topics, doing it even dynamically in the flow of things. And it can work also to eventually create groups of students that can work well together. So mix and match interests and characters and personalities so that people can have the optimal binding as a group when they study. Because after all, studying is it's not just one-on-one. It's typically and increasingly many and many. And that's what AI can do, and can do a lot more.
So I know we're a little bit over time, but if the panelists don't mind, answer 2 more questions. Is it okay?
Okay.
So one question is, which aspect of AI do you see having the greatest impact on humans in the coming decade? I guess, Charles-Edouard, you should talk to that because you wrote a book about it.
Yeah. I don't want to say too much about the book in detail. I think you should read it. No, there's a couple of things. As I said, artificial intelligence is an oxymoron. I'm repeating myself. And therefore, what it's doing, it's enhancing us. So I tend to talk about HAI, which is human augmented intelligence. So I think what we will see, we will see augmented consumers. We will see people that know how to invest. They know how to choose their education. They know how to choose for their kids. And we will see augmented workers, and that will, someone is putting, Marine is putting the book.
Yes, it's very,
on the
thank you,
so
Marine.
you can order online. Marine disturbed me. So we will see this augmentation of everyone. So I think the biggest thing we will see in the next decade is going to be what I call this control of your life. You're going to retake control of your life because you're going to be augmented on many dimensions of your life where you are totally inefficient, where you have to catch up on the weekend, on the evening. You're investing, you have to take care of your family, you have to take care of education. And all of this will be augmented. And I think it will be like water going up. And in 10 years, our life will be completely different because we will be augmented. The only risk is if the world goes in a different direction, which is that we continue to be remotely managed, that we accept to go into a virtual world and gaming world and we escape reality, then it will be the world of machine because we will be in the matrix, like in the movie.
Antoine?
I'm nothing to add except that perhaps we're already in the matrix.
Yes, That's Elon Musk said it.
Yes.
One chance in a million that this is not a video game that we are currently doing in this webinar.
Yes.
My personal hope is that within a decade we can cure cancer.
So on this one, I think,
medicine.
yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. You know, humans have a inherent condition. They try not to die, and so as a result, as long as the regulation and the profession catches up, I think that healthcare and biotech is going to make huge stride over the next 10 years for sure.
Yes, we will greatly expand life expectancies of humans.
Yes, AI will save us. I tend to say AI will save us before it kills us, right?
Yeah.
Right. I think we'll be killed by other factors like the environment and so on before AI.
Yes.
All right. So one last question, which is kind of pertinent. How do you decide if your investment is profitable? I guess, how do you evaluate the success of your investment?
So it's very simple, right? Do you exit and do you make money when you exit? So the conundrum of a venture capital investor is that it's paper money until you exit. So however you mark to market your investment, it's only paper money. So you will look at public comps. You'll look at what some private companies have done when they exit. You will look at how much the company is now worth given the latest round of investment, but it's still fundamentally paper money. So it's what it is. There is some now significant movement on secondaries, so you can begin to sell for larger firms. You can begin to sell your private equity to secondary funds that will buy that private equity. But fundamentally and essentially, as you only know when you've been successful in an investment when you exit it and the public market on an acquisition, and that's when you check mark your investment as a good investment or a bad investment. And that's the job.
All right. So we have, sorry, we have passed the time, so I would like the panelists to give one last advice to our students in the audience on what they should be doing or what they should expect if they want to start a company in AI. Any advice you can give them as anything else you want to say as a concluding remark for the webinar today?
Okay, I get started and then Antoine can do the conclusion. There was a very interesting Harvard Business Review study in the summer of last year, which concluded that tech rules and will rule the world for the next decades. And it's true, and AI will be a strong part of it. So you are in the right university, you are in the right field. But once you have this technology, you have nothing. What you need to have is you need to solve a problem. So tech will rule the world, but please solve problems.
Yes, and I will say, as you want to become an entrepreneur, I'll give you just 5 bullets to remember. It's very easy. First, don't do it alone. Find a trusted partner or partners with whom you can do it. 2, combine the deep technology with domain expertise, solve a problem. 3, dream big, because you've got to dream, you've got to set a goal that's ambitious, but operate small. Go at it step by step. 4, don't think about the money, think about the value, right? You're not going to get rich soon. You're going to get rich eventually as a byproduct of the value you create. And finally, build the right culture, because companies live and die by the culture they create. So transparency, honesty, ownership, accountability, teamwork, these are critical to you as a founder to succeed.
All right. On that note, thank you so much to our panelists today, Antoine and Charles-Edouard. Thank you so much for all your amazing answers to these questions and advice for our students, even our staff, faculty as well. Thank you so much. And we look forward to welcoming you to our campus physically again soon, and to meet with our students perhaps next year. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pascale.
Oh, there's the one question. There's Oh, that's not a question. There's explanation
me.
that there's a Chinese and French version of your book.
Yeah,
So
for the different languages.
yes, great. And so thank you so much. And thank you to the audience as well. See you soon.
Take care.
Thank you,
Thanks so much.
Pascale. Thank you, everyone, for
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.